Good morning, everyone. This is another episode of the Canadian Immigration Law Q&A. We actually should have changed the screen. Welcome, everyone, back. As usual, Wednesdays, 10 a.m., we host a live Q&A where we answer your questions to as much as we can. We're not providing legal advice, but we hope that this live Q&A will help some people to get answers to their most common questions. So I'm joined today by Alicia. Mark is away. He's doing a presentation for Legal Professional Education Network, LPEN, and he talks about the year in review, what's ahead of us in 2025 and what was happening in 2024. So that's why we're both together with Alicia today. And Isabella says good morning. Good morning to you, Isabella. And as we wait for people to pile in, Alicia, how are you doing?
I am keeping my head afloat, Igor. I'm keeping my head afloat. So there have been a number of changes in immigration recently, both inside Canada, and we're seeing a whole bunch of things south of the border as well. So one of the big news items in Canada recently has been the announced cuts to the immigration department. And so this is something that no doubt will affect many, many people. And they have announced that they're making large cutbacks in terms of staffing rollbacks. So they're going to be cutting back on over 3,300 jobs through the immigration department, and that is going to be rolled out over the next 3 years. But there's been some commentary from other immigration lawyers that we know who are talking about how severe this will be in terms of what kind of processing times we're going to now be seeing. So just last week, Mark and I were talking about the fact that we saw the processing times for outside Canada spousals be a year, inside Canada spousals are 2 years. So now that they are axing a whole bunch of jobs for IRCC workers, those processing times are only going to go up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Alicia, do you think artificial intelligence was a factor at play here in their decision to cut so many jobs?
Well, it's possible, right? Because they are relying more on the AI screening tools when they are doing their first stage analysis of whether it's a complete application, and they're using it for a lot of triage. And we know that. They are, of course, keeping this in lockstep with their reductions overall. So we know that the overall levels plans for permanent residents, as well as the caps on temporary residents, are going to have the effect of bringing down all of our levels of temporary and permanent workers in Canada. And so this is kind of in line with, they said, pre-pandemic levels. So they're looking at getting back to lower numbers of processing, having fewer landings, having fewer applications finalized.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. And then we also had another major news update this week, actually just yesterday. And this was a point of discussion during the last live Q&A. And many people are talking about it because pretty much everyone is affected. Every foreign national and international student is affected by this decision. And what we're talking about is the changes to the spousal open work permit eligibility. So, as many of you may already know, from January 21st, starting this January 21st, we have new eligibility rules that severely restrict who can apply for the spousal open work permit. And we already had some changes to the postgrad work permits. Now international students are affected even more, again, with their spouses not being eligible for the spousal open work permit. So Alicia, why don't we talk about this really briefly to let people know what exactly is going on?
Yeah. So Igor, maybe you can pull up. So we know that those announcements were made on the 14th of January, and I was working with a client. We were trying to get his application filed. He finally got an LMIA from his employer. He was trying to get all his paperwork in order to file his application. He had just gotten married. We were trying to file the application for his spouse as well. And of course, on the same day, they announced these changes, and we worked like the dickens over over Friday and the weekend in order to try to get all that filed on Monday before 5 a.m. UTC time when all the new rules took effect. So yes, we know for students, these rules, they had kind of telegraphed what was going to happen for students. And so we know that as of January 21st, so now, if you are doing a master's or a doctoral or one of the only listed professional or eligible programs, those are the ones where you could still have your spouse apply. But remember that all the requirements for proving temporary intent still apply. And so, it doesn't mean that your application is going to get approved just because you're in one of these programs and you're bringing a spouse. You still need to show if you've got kids, who's going to be supporting the kids. If you have significant ties to your home country, you've got to prove those. How long is that spouse coming? What's their connection back to show that they would go back at the end of their authorized stay? So make sure that if you are an international student and you are hoping to have your spouse join you in Canada while you do your Canadian program of studies, it's only going to be these that are eligible, and you still have to do a good job of proving that your spouse has a temporary intent.
Yeah, and there's like this very narrow list of eligible programs, so not many people would fall under one of those. But what really affects a lot of students is the pretty much disqualification of spouses of international students who study in bachelor degree programs, except if they study in one of these very narrow programs from the list. So yes, we've been waiting for this change for a very long time, but then this was not it, right? There's like the news update is twofold. So first, it affects the international students once again, and then it also affects the spouses of foreign workers in Canada. And again, there are two different types of temporary foreign workers here in Canada. The foreign nationals who are employed in low-skilled occupations and high-skilled occupations. And for one of them, the news are bad, but for the others, news are even worse, right? So what
Yeah.
we're talking about here, Alicia, is the new changes, right? So we have explained all of these changes in our blog post on our website, so holthelaw.com, and then you go to our blog, and then there's this latest blog post that was just updated yesterday. And so we talk in detail about all of these. But primarily, the new spousal open work permit eligibility requires that you have the valid work permit for at least 16 months, and then you are employed in a skilled occupation, so tier 0 or 1 only. So tier 2 or 3, there is a limited list of occupations. If you are in tier 4 or 5, so low skilled occupation, the worst news are for you. So you will not be able to bring your spouse, and regardless of your tier level, you will not be able to bring your child on a work permit. So your child may be eligible for the visitor record or study permit, but not a work permit. So Alicia, let's guide our viewers through the list of tier 2 and tier 3 where most people will fall
So,
under.
yeah, and so Igor, I want to give you some kudos because Igor had drafted that article. We showed people Igor's article last week, but he turned around and he updated that yesterday because immigration really buried that list of tier 2 and tier 3. And Igor did a really nice job of right away going and updating the blog article to make it obvious who's on that list for tier 2 and tier 3, because most people in Canada are not working tier 0 and tier 1 jobs. Those are very difficult. They're senior manager positions or executive positions. So most people fall under tier 2 and tier 3. So it's really important to know if your job falls under one of the listed NOC codes that is eligible for you to have your spouse apply. So Igor did a really good job of kind of digging through the IRCC tools online to figure out where that list is. And he's going to show you where that list is.
Yeah. And Alicia, I have no idea why they made it so difficult to find this list. If they posted the news release on their website, black and white, so easy to find, everyone knew about it, and they said, we're going to update with a list of eligible NOC codes. Why don't you update the news release, and just post updated, and then here's the list of the tier codes, NOC codes. I don't know. And yeah, it took some time for people to find this list. And what you're looking at right now is the page where you find this list. Do you see it right now? I don't. That means you have to answer a couple of questions just for you to get to the list. So here's how you find the list. And again, if you need a link, you just go to open work permits for family members of foreign workers, and then who can apply. Just type that in Google and it will take you to this page. And then here, you have to go through a little wizard, right? So have you applied for PR through an economic immigration program or pilot listed below? So you can expand, take a look, most likely no. Are you a temporary foreign worker who received a work permit through one of the eligible pathways to PR? And then again, you can expand the list, and then you would answer no. And then, are you a high-skilled or low-skilled worker? So here, you can take a look at the description, take a look, but likely you would already know if you're a low-skilled worker. So if you are a low-skilled worker, bad news. Not eligible to apply for the spousal open work permit. Okay? And then if your spouse already has an open work permit, spousal open work permit, they can extend it after January 21st if all of the following requirements apply. So they are already in Canada, their work permit is valid for a shorter period of time than yours, so the work permit of the principal applicant, and then they can apply to extend the work permit before their initial work permit expires. Okay? But then, if you select high-skilled worker from the drop-down, then you have a list of requirements, and you need to click on here, principal applicant requirements, and only then you will find the list of eligible NOC codes. So here's the list for Tier 2, here's the list for Tier 3, and if you have trouble finding that webpage, you can always go back to our website, holthelaw.com, our blog, and then look for this blog post, and we have prepared the list of the tier eligible NOC codes for you in here. So Alicia, let's take a look at the list. What do you notice interesting about it? So I see mostly the trade occupations, like or occupations that are involved in trades, like construction estimators, electrical engineering technologists, carpenters, bricklayers, insulators. Can you explain why would they put these occupations on the list primarily?
Yeah, and that's from their news release. So we did know that when they first announced this, and they did that news release back on January 14th, they said that, certain sectors, so they specifically said occupations in the natural and applied sciences, so that's going to be a lot of your NOC 2 occupations that are there. Then they said construction. So a lot of the construction NOCs are there. Healthcare, natural resources, education, sports, and military sectors. And I don't know why necessarily they have the education and the sports and military sectors, but I can only assume that it's tied to their in-demand and labor shortage projections. And so that's why they are listing these specific NOCs, because basically they are wanting to disincent anyone to bring their spouse unless you happen to be in one of the occupations that we really need, in which case, maybe they will let you bring your spouse.
Yeah. And to be honest, Alicia, I don't see many education-related NOC codes in here.
The one that's really surprising to me that is on there is like the early childhood educators, because those ones, there's a lot of people who tend to fall in that category. And it's not really rewarded. Like, it's really difficult to get a PNP under that. So I'm surprised that the early childhood educators and assistants is on there, but that's the main one that stands out for me on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, this list again reiterates that Canada is facing a severe housing crisis right now, and they want to bring more people to build homes, right? So that they can allow for this population to grow, because until this moment, our population was growing in this disconnect from the number of houses and apartments that we have in Canada. And so many people would end up like 20 international students in one basement. And that became a big uh, concern, especially in light of upcoming elections. And different political parties use this argument against each other, blaming each other for this havoc, and whatever we see in here is kind of this attempt to fix the problem by especially focusing on people in construction and trades and agriculture and transportation. So we have transport truck drivers, bus drivers, subway operators. Not many people um, are eligible under the new rules, except if you are within the very narrow category. So I think, Alicia, that would be enough for the wrap up. I see we have more than 200 people who are watching, so we'll go quickly through the comments and see. So Afro B says good morning, and then Baljeet says hello. And then we have a couple of questions, so we'll get to those just in a second. Angela says good morning. And then this one is really good from Isabella. Thanks for the advice from Alicia from last week. There is only one NACS code for my company, and the accountant does know what it is from the tax documents. Okay, so that probably pertains to your consultation, Alicia.
It was from a question last week from Isabella on the live. So
okay. All right. So let's see who else says good morning. For people who just tune in, let us know where you tune in from. Juan says hi, Mark and Alicia, and then he just corrected himself. Hello, Juan. All right, and then Crystal also says good morning. All right, and I'll propose that we start with the super chat first. So if an open work permit holder got nominated under PNP Alberta Tech Pathway, can he or she transfer employer while waiting for the PR approval after submission in express entry?
So MLU, this is where, Mark normally rings the bell, and we don't have the bell sound effect at the moment, but I will ring the imaginary little bell. So this is a highly volatile situation, and we get this question all the time. And the problem is this. The problem that is for Alberta Tech Pathway and a lot of the other PNPs that are employer driven, there are a bunch of requirements, especially now, where the employers have to sign an employer declaration form and they have to prove that they meet eligibility requirements as an employer. So they have a certain number of employees, they have a certain amount of gross revenue, they've been in operation for at least 2 years, and they can prove all this with their incorporation docs and balance sheets and leases and things like that. So in order for you to get a nomination, the provincial government has to assess the eligibility of the employer and then look at the eligibility of the job offer. So it's two things. Is the employer eligible? And then is the job offer they've given you eligible? And only after assessing those things would they then say, yeah, we're going to nominate you for an employer-driven category of PNP. And that's how Alberta Tech works. That's how a lot of the different PNP streams work. After they've nominated you, then of course you get the 600 points, and then it's linked to your federal express entry profile. And then if you submit your federal EAPR, so let's assume you get an ITA, you submit that EAPR, then everything's kind of locked in. And if you try to change employers in the meantime, the risk is that Alberta says, no, we're not going to change the employer. We're not going to change the nomination, because when it's an employer-driven stream, when you get your nomination certificate back, it will tell you whether there's a restriction on employment. It'll say yes, and it'll say restriction on employment, yes, and it'll say the name of your employer. So if you're changing employers, you would actually need to get a new nomination certificate from the province. And they may not do that. They might just say, no, we're not going to do it. And if that happens, then the whole thing falls down like a house of cards, because the province can withdraw their nomination certificate. And if they withdraw the nomination certificate, they will tell that to the federal government. And then the federal government can take away your invitation to apply, or just say that you're ineligible for PR because you no longer have those 600 points from the nomination certificate. So it can be a very, very risky thing. So I definitely recommend that you reach out and book a consult.
Yeah. And Alicia, it's a little bit unrelated because it concerns a different program, but a similar situation happened to one of the clients with whom I had a consult. So they applied for the Rural and Northern Immigration Pilot, RNAP, and the employer was really bad. So essentially, the guy decided to abandon his employment and seek employment with a different employer. And obviously, that resulted from in a withdrawal of the community letter.
Mm-hmm.
And then the applicant got a new community letter, a new job offer. Everything was approved through the province. He decided to submit another application for RNAP while his initial application was still pending in the processing. And he decided to give a call to the RCC officer on the phone, to the actual phone support person, right? And ask if they should remove the first application that is still being processed before they submit the second application. And the officer told them, no, it's fine. Your application is a long way into the processing, so you can just keep it. And then if the officer doesn't like it, he just refuses the application, and then your second application will get processed. Guess what happened? Second application got returned because you cannot have two applications of the same type in the processing. And the first application got refused because you essentially, if you have a new job offer, the only exception where you can submit a new job offer and the new community letter is if the employer is ineligible, right? Like if the employer got on the list of employers who are not allowed to hire you. And so, yeah, like just one tiny mistake, right? Wrong advice from a person who you cannot even go after, and this very bad drama that happened between the worker and the employer just screwed up the whole situation for the family. And luckily, they still have a valid open work permit. Not open work permit, actually. Or actually, yes, I think it was an open work permit. So they can still work for another couple of years, and they can wait until the new permanent program reopens. But yeah, changing employers, if the program is employer-driven, is a big problem.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm actually working on a blog article right now because this is a similar situation to bridging open work permits and bridging closed work permits. And I've had a number of people who have come to me, they've done stuff on their own or with a consultant, and they applied for a bridging closed work permit and they got refused and they couldn't figure out why. And then they realized, oh, we should have applied for a bridging closed work permit because our nomination is employer specific. There's a restriction on my employment. I'm only eligible for a bridging closed work permit. And if you switch to a bridging open work permit and get refused, then you can lose your ability to continue working. So these are really important distinctions.
All right. Alicia, I want to pull up this question from Anand. So he's asking if he can contact his local MP when the PR application has crossed the processing time. And what if the processing times change since the time that he submits his application?
Yeah, and this is what we're going to see more and more of, right? We're going to see that when you submit your application, maybe it says the processing times are 151 days, but then, oh, wait, now they've fired 3,000 IRCC workers. Well, now the processing times are probably going to be 400 days. And normally IRCC says, well, we're not going to do anything about it unless your processing has exceeded the normal processing times. And the normal processing times are probably going to be whatever is posted. And so if those keep creeping longer and longer, the likelihood that IRCC will do anything about it is slim. And so trying to contact your MP to say, hey, do something about this when it's still within normal processing times is not likely to be successful. There's nothing preventing you from trying, but it's just not likely to be successful.
Yes. And Alicia, what's important here as well is if you look at the federal skilled worker, for example, right, and you click on here, how we calculated the processing times, it says this is how long we expect it will take. It's not how long it will actually take. It's how long they estimate it's going to take to process your application. And again, it includes most of the applications, right? So the complexity of your file, the background check, all of these factors are important in here. And if you look at this my favorite new tool, and I cannot imagine, like, this number keeps growing every single week. So it was 2,500 applications. Then it was 1,004,000. Now it's 6,000. So many applications are in the backlog. So if you go here, permanent residence, actually no, in the backlog, you can see the permanent residence, let it load. 38% of the applications are in the backlog. So 38% of the applications take longer than what is posted in here. So you're not the only one. And then another comment that probably I would want to leave here, Alicia, is reaching out to MPs. Yes, it can be a workable solution, but it should be I would say, a measure of last resort, because we want MPs to focus on their actual primary work, right? Thinking of new laws, communicating with their constituents, and actually doing something for the country. And yes, I understand that this is an important factor, that you potentially may be living in their region, and they would represent you as well. But imagine if all 38% of the applicants whose applications are in the backlog reach out to MPs. We would just paralyze the work of the parliament, of the country. And unless it's something really egregious, probably you should refrain from doing this. Okay, Alicia, let's tackle a few more questions. Oh my God, we have 5 super chats. Okay, so this person is asking, what's the impact of this, and I assume this change with the spousal open work permits, on unemployment rate?
Yeah, so maybe Igor, I don't know if you can search for the unemployment rates updated numbers in the background, but they released the new updated numbers. And so this is something that we are watching carefully, because immigration is tying this, of course, to eligibility for a bunch of programs, and that makes sense. And so, especially for LMIAs, you're not eligible to try to even apply for an LMIA based work permit if your unemployment is higher than 6% in your census metropolitan area. There are some regions that are outside of the CMAs. And so if you're outside of a CMA, largely in a rural area, then you still can apply for an LMIA through your employer. Well, your employer applies for the LMIA, and then that would be something where they name you as a worker and you apply for the work permit. But in CMAs where those unemployment rates are above 6, so they highlight it. So anything that's in bold is above 6. So for example, in Calgary, LMIAs are a no-go right now unless specific exemptions apply. But basically, these numbers keep getting updated every couple months so that we can see what the change is and what's happening to unemployment. And, the rates have gone down slightly in some economic regions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see the huge dip in unemployment rate in Edmonton, and then it looks like Vancouver now became on the list of communities where you can apply for the LMIA.
And Igor, can you scroll up to see what the dates are on there?
Yes. So this is from April 3rd, from January 10th to April 3rd. So they will keep updating this every other month. All right. Okay, and let me just switch back. Okay. The next super chat is from Parveen. Any thoughts on RCIP, Rural Community Immigration Pilot, or launching date? We don't know the launching date, but we know some details about the program.
Yeah, and so this is interesting because all we have is the regulatory impact statement, right? So we just know that they have put this into the Canada Gazette. So it's in the notices. It was December 14th, 2024, that they said, okay, well, here's 2 new pieces of legislation that they are going to pass through law. But there have been no program delivery instructions from IRCC yet. So all we know is that they did these two different pieces of law. The first one they list is the Francophone community immigration class, and then you have to scroll like halfway down this page before you find the ministerial instructions with respect to the rural community immigration class. So it's not even going to be a pilot anymore, right? So instead of a P, it's turning to a C. It's turning from a pilot to an actual class, a federal category. And so the RCIC, which is also very confusing because that's also the regulated consultants, which is also very confusing. Anyways, this new rural program, we don't know a ton about it because they have yet to release what are the actual communities and what are the rules for each community in order to get your community designation. So we're going to have to stay tuned for this one, but at least we know that these are kind of the bones of the legislative structure for it. So the ministerial instructions have been passed.
Yeah. And Alicia, so maybe we can walk through the work experience criteria because those are important. So you have to have at least 1 year of full-time continuous work or an equivalent in part-time in the occupation listed from here, like in this list, right? And then this work experience must be acquired in the 3 years before the day when you submit an application. And what else? Applicant with a nursing experience, international graduate exemption. So you can search for this news release by typing Canada Gazette volume 158, and this is again December 14th. Or you can also just type RCIP Canada Gazette and then look for this search result.
Yeah, use the C though, RCIC. And it's interesting, Igor, if you go back to the ministerial instructions, it echoes very closely what we see in the ministerial instructions for express entry, right? So all this language is very, very similar to what we see in express entry. And so when we talk about genuine offers of employment, that mirrors what is in the current express entry streams. When it talks about the work experience, it's using the same language, right? It's got the activities of the main lead statement. It's got the majority or a substantial number of the main duties that are bullet pointed main duties. And it's talking about basically CEC eligibility for 1 year full-time or equivalent part-time within the last 3 years. So those are all very, very similar to express entry. The good thing here is there's a bit of wiggle room because you'll see that there are some tier 4 positions on here. So this might be one of the only ways for tier 4 or tier 5 applicants to get a pathway to PR. So this is a federal program. You have to be living in one of these rural communities, but it's probably going to be the only real way for lower tier applicants to search for PR.
Yes. And Alicia, like, I cannot help but once again remind everyone, it's been a couple of years that we're talking about people moving out of big cities, moving out of Toronto, relocating to the small rural communities. Like there's a huge human crisis in those rural communities. People move out to big cities, and the government is trying to do everything to bring people back. And we've done an RNAP episode with Claire's Home. I think it was last year, and one of the things that the Chief Economic Development Officer from Claire's Home told is that they are looking for people who actually settle in the community first, because if they have their roots in that community, it's less likely they will move out to a big city afterwards, because they will have to abandon everything that they've built. If it's a person coming from a big city to a small rural community, there's always this sentiment that it's possible that they just move here just to get permanent residence and then they will move. But then he also told something interesting, is that people who actually settle in those small rural communities, they actually love it because they live close to the nature. They know everyone. There's endless opportunity. They can open their own business. They can realize all of their potential in that small community, which is much harder to do in a big town. So for many people, who are wondering, like, what do I do? Consider living in a small rural community. All right, so Taj just sent a super chat, but without any question. And then we have one more from Isabella from the previous live Q&A. So Isabella is asking, it's been a dry month for both Express Entry and AAIP, Alberta Advantage Immigration Program draws. What's going on? Any forecasting on nomination allocation under the Alberta Advantage Immigration Program? Isabella, I'm sorry, I don't have the crystal ball thing that Mark pulls in, but we'll try to answer your question regardless.
Yeah, so I guess we can go to the rounds of invitations. We usually do that. That's something we check in with on the lives often because, yeah, we haven't had a draw since January 8th, I believe, is our last one. And we will have to stay tuned and see what IRCC is going to do. Sometimes they do a draw by the end of the live, and Igor updates us and says, wait a minute, they just did a draw, which is what happened last time. But we've not had a draw since January 8th. So we know that it was a fairly small number of people that were invited under that ITA. So only 1,300 people were invited. And the CRS score was high, right? 542, which is extremely high and very difficult to attain. Yeah. So we will have to see. And there was a very small PNP draw just the day before. But those are the only two for January so far.
Mm-hmm. And Alicia, I also look at the numbers for December. So December was also a pretty dry month, right? So we had, let's say, maybe 2,500 invitations only. And then if we compare that to November, where we have close to 5,000, I think, or even more. So do you think there will still be another draw in January? If yes, then I think it probably would be again PNP and pretty small draw.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably pretty safe to say they'll do another small draw, hopefully. But I agree with you, it's probably going to be a PNP because they're not doing anything to shake the boat right now. It's pretty lean at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And
then
question,
I guess, Igor,
yeah.
we can also pop quickly over to the AAIP processing information. And the AAIP website's a little bit of a pain because you've got to scroll forever down the page to try to figure out what is going on. It does say, just confirming that Alberta has not received its 2025 number of provincial nominee allocations, so we still don't know what that is. We are suspecting that it'll be half of what it was last year, so it'll probably be around 4,500, maybe 5,000, but probably pretty low. So there you go. That's where that is summarized. And then basically they go through and they break down each of the streams and how many applications are currently waiting to be processed and what is the date of submission for those applications. So which ones they're working on from how long ago. And then they give kind of an expression of interest pool. You can see there are 42,000 people waiting in the pool. Once we scroll all the way down to the worker expression of interest, so 42,000 people. And here's the problem with the Alberta worker EOI. When they've delivered all these presentations to lawyers in Alberta, they've clearly said, look, there's nothing within the worker EOI system that screens for eligibility. So out of these 42,000, it is possible that half of them are not even eligible for any individual category. Like you can make a worker EOI and have zero hope of ever applying or being nominated because there's nothing in their system that actually screens for eligibility. So it's up to you to go and cross-reference with all the program eligibility to make sure you are also eligible for a stream.
Right. Well, pretty much the same thing is with Express Entry, but even then, like if you not eligible, the system will not let you create a profile.
That's right.
You can put whatever you want in there, which would probably be similar to misrepresenting. So you don't want to do that. But if you are eligible and you have the profile, at least you have some hope. And that worked out for one of my clients. She like Alicia, she didn't have a single shot, like not a single chance that she would get an ITA. Her score was too low, but she was a nurse, and she indicated that she doesn't mind to go to Ontario. And guess what happened? Then all of a sudden she gets an expression of interest from Ontario, like with a pretty low CRS score. And now she's just patiently waiting for her PR application to be finalized. So that's still a thing. But with Alberta, not really. All right. We have a question from Crystal. So Crystal says, applied for PR last December 24th through PNP non-express entry stream. Permit expires on June 25th. Is it ideal to apply for the support letter and extend now, or should Crystal wait for the acknowledgement of receipt?
And so, Crystal, whenever you're saying, what should I do, right? Like, we can only give general immigration information. It would not be professional for us to try to give legal advice based on 3 lines of text without knowing everything that's going on. It's way too high stakes. And the last thing I would ever want to do is give you advice that's going to be wrong because I just don't know enough about your situation. So, in general, it is very important if you're applying through most of the PNPs that you maintain your temporary status. And so it is super important that you make sure that you are doing this correctly. And depending on the restrictions on employment, depending on whether it was an employer-sponsored type of PNP program that you were applying under, sometimes you have that bridging open work permit, but a lot of the times you have to actually ask for that R204C. So Regulation 204 sub C of the Immigration Refugee Protection Act basically is something that the provincial government is going to give in support of your bridging closed work permit. And so normally it is important to ask for that as soon as you can in order to have that, because most of the time you've got to wait to submit that bridging work permit application until you do have proof that it was received by IRCC. So make sure to book a consult, but it's always a good thing if you do need that R204C letter to make sure to initiate that process, because each province has different timelines. Sometimes you have to pay a separate fee to ask for that 204C letter. Sometimes they just automatically give it to you. So check with your province to make sure that they can issue that as soon as possible if it's something you need.
Yeah. And Alicia, we have the question from Sumit. Do we know why e-copers are not being issued? People have been waiting for close to 90 days. And Sumit, you're not the only one. There are many, many people who are going through the same. Just a good example that they are issuing e-copers is my previous HNC client. So she got the portal invitation to register for the PR portal after her HNC application was approved in mid-November, so November 15th. And then she received the e-coper, let me tell you exactly. So that was January 15th. So November 15th to December, and then December to January. So at least 2 months. But they do issue it. The last one was January 15th. So just keep waiting. And I do have another client, and Alicia, this is brutal. This is not fair. The express entry application was approved, and the client's work permit was expiring, but he didn't have the e-coper yet. So he registered for the portal, and then he's still waiting for his e-coper. And the only thing that he could do is to apply for the bridge and pay $255 fee, which is not fair. Like, why $255 just to extend their ability to, while RCC is dragging their feet? Like, we can complain for about it. All right, let's go back to the questions. I had to skip quite a few of them because of the super chat. So let's see. Okay, Rajiv says, what is the exact meaning of PFN in SOVP? Oh, those acronyms. So PFN means principal formula, probably. We don't typically use PFN acronym in our daily work, but Alicia, do you have any other idea what PFN might mean?
Yeah, no, Rajiv, I would need more context. So.
Yeah, but likely it's principal for a national, I think, Alicia. All right. Radiant says, do you guys think there will be a draw today? No. My bet is no. Okay.
We're not so optimistic today.
Yeah. Sukhpreet, however, is. He says it might be hope. So Radiant, what are your points? Okay. Let me scroll to see other questions. Is spousal open work permit holder eligible for Alberta Express Entry?
Yeah, so if you go to the Alberta Express Entry, it's interesting because AOS has a clear list of people who are eligible based on the type of work permit. But if you go to the Alberta Advantage Immigration Program and you go to the AAIP application streams and you go down to Alberta Express Entry and then you go down to Alberta eligibility for Alberta Express Entry and you go down to the minimum assessment application requirements. And so basically somebody has to have a federal express entry profile. You have to fit CEC or FSW or FST. You have to have an active profile in the pool. You have to have a minimum CRS of 300 points. Your primary occupation should be an occupation in demand, which changes based on Alberta's projections through their 17 pages of spreadsheets, which is very difficult to ascertain. But you have to have an intention to live in Alberta, and you can't apply if you are on the ineligible occupations list. So it's listed there, so you'll have to check that list. So this is for AOS. So you can't apply for Alberta Express Entry if you are on the AOS ineligible listed NOCs. So make sure that you're not on one of these NOCs. Otherwise, you can't apply if you are a refugee, claimant, or you are under an appeal or removal process, or you have another active nomination, and then it goes through the pathway requirements. And so then the pathway requirements are that, yeah, you have to be living in Alberta. If you have a relative, they have to be living in Alberta. They talk about the AAIP occupation in demand. So this is where you can go to all these lists and they have occupational tables, short-term employment forecasts, and then the long occupational outlook forecasts, and it has to be high or moderately high. And then after all that, there are specific eligibility requirements if you're looking for healthcare or tech. But other than that, there's nothing in here. So there is priority sectors. So that's sometimes one of the factors that they use when they do draws. But there's nothing in here that talks about you're not eligible if you have an open work permit. There is if you go to AOS. If you go to AOS, it talks about what are the applicable work permit eligible types. And for those ones, that's where the open work permits can be a problem unless it was issued under a particular public policy.
Yeah. All right, Alicia, I will pull up this question from Strawberry. Good morning from Vancouver. For CEC, my job duties fall under 4 different job titles, but all of them will be under Tier 2 or 3. Is this okay? So Tier 2 and 3 is eligible for CEC, yes, but you need to make sure that you select the one NOC code. You cannot have 4. You cannot say to the officer, I think it's either this or this or that or that. You have to select one. And you need to, the onus is on the applicant, right? To satisfy the officer that the requirements are met. And if you choose the wrong NOC code, and we've dealt with clients in similar situations before, the officer can just refuse your application saying, wrong NOC code. So it's on you to demonstrate to the officer that this is the right NOC code. And there are different ways to do it. First, you look at your reference letter and you make sure that your reference letter fits the specific NOC code. You look at different NOC codes, you explain to the officer in the letter of explanation why this is not the right NOC code and the one that you chose is the correct one. And then we also use the NOC selection tool, which is a proprietary material that we have created in Holthe Immigration Law. It's basically just a table, right, where you compare your NOC code with your reference letter and you provide explanation. So when it comes to choosing the right NOC code, we typically cannot assess which is the right knock code just here on the live stream. Actually, not typically, never, because this is a very case-specific thing, right? Like, we need to assess all of the things that you've done at your job. We need to look at everything holistically, at your reference letter, at your salary, at your company, right? So it takes time. So the first step would be for you to reach out for the consult. So ring this imaginary bell for you, Strawberry.
And the other thing, Igor, too, is that a lot of times people create their own express entry profiles and they assume, hey, my job title is this. I'm pretty sure my knock is this. And they go and they create their express entry application. They create their primary occupation. They list their job and their work experience with this knock. And then if they get an ITA and they go back to their HR department and they say, hey, can I get a letter confirming my work? Some employers are very specific on knocks, and they actually have a whole internal ranking system and pay grades associated with each tier and knock code. And they might disagree. They might say, well, no way. Like, we actually have your knock listed as X. Mm-hmm. And if you've listed something else and you now have an ITA, you could be in a situation where immigration says you've misrepresented, especially if you are looking at one of those category-based draws. And so it's really important for you to get a hold of what is your knock well in advance of submitting your express entry profile, hopefully, and definitely well in advance of getting your invitation to apply. So definitely reach out, talk to us so that you can understand what are the factors that I need to look at. How do I go and talk to my employer about this? And then get the letter back from your employer or job duties, take a look at your actual offer of employment. Sometimes that has a job description, sometimes it doesn't. And so sometimes it's a bit of a negotiation with your employer to try to figure out, well, what's the best way to describe the job duties? You can't just cut and paste them from the knock. Mm-hmm. And so it is important to do a really good job of that. Sometimes employers don't want to budge, really, and then it's up to you to try to figure out different ways to prove, well, this is the job that I'm doing. So this is something that a lot of people leave too late.
Yes. Alicia, this is an interesting question from Hussein. So with the new regulations, can we have one application submitted at the same time for postgrad work permit and spousal open work permit?
After the new regulation, can we have one application at the same time for postgrad and spousal open work permit? Oh, so applying together? Is that maybe what Hussein's asking?
Well, yeah, Hussein, it's not really clear if perhaps you are the spouse of the foreign worker who's a international student or a foreign worker, actually, yes. And that's why you are eligible for the spousal. And then maybe you are yourself an international student. So it's very hard for us to understand exactly your situation because it's a little confusing as to what is your current status, right? And are you submitting the application for your spouse, or you're just wondering about yourself? So Alicia, this probably would require a consult, right?
Yeah, and Hussein, just, if you go to the IRCC website, they used to have, if you're applying for a postgrad work permit at the same time as your spouse, right? So some people could be eligible for a PGWP and they're also at the same time submitting that open spousal work permit. And then they had like a drop down if you're inside Canada versus if you're outside Canada for the spouse. So just be careful and make sure to check IRCC's up-to-date processing guidelines. And maybe, Igor, while we're talking about those spousal open work permits, JM Canada or JM Can, I saw your son applied for a dependent open work permit January 20th, but by the time you paid and you got confirmation, it was 9 p.m., but GC Key shows January 21st. Is there a chance this will be overturned to January 20th? Oh dear, my friend. This is where immigration says they use UTC time. They use Universal Coordinated Time. And so you don't actually have, midnight in whatever time zone you live in. It's what is UTC time, 5 a.m. January 21st, according to IRCC. And so if your time and date stamp is that you actually submitted on the 21st, unfortunately, your son is most likely going to get that application returned as not being eligible.
Yeah.
And this applies for everybody. Like, we talk about UTC time all the time because it is so important. And if you don't have the right time and date stamp, you've missed your deadline.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I couldn't find that question, Alicia, in the list. I was just scrolling, trying to find it, but
It's pretty near the beginning, Igor.
oh, okay, okay, got it. All right, and then the next one is from James. So I work 30 hours per week, but my job is a part-time job. However, the ONP instructions and definitions say that a full-time job is 30 hours per week or 1,560 hours a year. So is this a part-time job or a full-time job?
And so, James, immigration uses 30 hours per week, 1,560 hours a year over 52 weeks to be their definition of what they consider to be full time in order to meet points for Canadian experience class, for high skilled Canadian work. And also, the provincial nominee programs usually use that 30 hours as their demarcation of what is considered a full time job. So, if you are getting paid for 30 hours, and this can get really complex depending on what kind of work you do, because some of my clients are like technical workers in the field and they have rotational shifts, and sometimes they have banked hours and overtime hours and standard hours. And then statutory pay, holidays, and things like that. So it can get really complex. And sometimes what I recommend that you do is actually spreadsheet your pay stubs and your timesheets and make sure that on average over your 52 weeks, you can show that you have an average of at least 30 hours per week. If you're falling under that 30-hour threshold, so maybe you had holidays that you weren't paid for, or you had some sort of leave of absence, or your hours fluctuate, then you might not be able to claim a certain number of weeks as full-time work, and you might have to work a little bit longer to accumulate the equivalent of 52 weeks.
And Alicia, as the time runs out, we will answer one last question from Jimit. Can we travel to the USA one day when the file is under the implied status, so is being processed for postgrad work permit?
And to meet, again, it's like ringing the bell on this. So if you look up IRCC and the postgrad work permit and the program manual, they do talk about processing of PGWP applications. The problem, of course, is any time that you leave Canada, there is a risk that you have lost your maintained or implied status. So you're also going to want to look up IRCC's policy on maintained or implied status. And if it's very important for you to continue working for an employer, it is always a risk if you are leaving Canada and you don't have a valid work permit. So some people have already a different valid work permit and they're leaving and coming back within the validity of their original work permit. If that is not your circumstance, then the risk is that if you come back after your original work permit has expired, that you've lost your maintained or implied status, and you might have to wait 7 months before that new work permit gets issued before you'd be eligible to work. So this is a big alarm bell. Just be very careful. Make sure to reach out and book a consult to talk with us about your exact situation. And in the meantime, you can go and search IRCC's website about their policy interpretation.
Yeah, and Alicia, I cannot help but pull up this last super chat. So I am on a postgrad work permit and my wife is on a spousal work permit, open work permit, first year of her doctorate. Sorry, not a spousal, study permit. First year of her doctorate. I came to Canada before her on a study permit, but she was never relied on me for it. Can I apply for a spousal open work permit under her study permit as my postgrad nears expiration? Oh, okay. So I understand. So Rajib came on a study permit, finished his program, got a postgrad work permit, then his spouse came, and now she's studying at the doctorate level. And the question is, can he apply for the spousal open work permit under the new rules?
Yeah, and so Rajib, this is where you would go through that decision tree that Igor was showing us at the very beginning of the live today. And you'd go there. And so if your spouse is doing a doctorate, then she would be on the eligible list. And then it's a matter of going through and making sure that she is the principal or the Canadian student meets all eligibility requirements. And then you as the spouse also meets eligibility requirements. And so In these situations, especially where you've been here for a long time and you have had a study permit yourself and then a PGWP, you still will want to speak to temporary intent, right? You still want to show how it is that you still have connections to your home country, you have financial ability to return home if and when required.
Yeah. All right, Alicia, thank you so much for your time. Thank you, everyone, for your interesting questions. Unfortunately, we cannot answer every single question. I see that we have 340 people. Just a reminder that we do answer case-specific questions only at the consultations. And the reason why is because we don't want to say something to you that would be considered as legal advice knowing only half, right? Or sometimes knowing 10% of your situation. Sometimes there's a lot of factors that we have to consider before we can tell you what to do. So if you are finding yourself in the situation where you need specific case-specific advice, please book a consult at our website, holthelaw.com. You can see the link right in here in the little white bar at the bottom of the screen. And yeah, and then we'll see you next Wednesday for another episode of the Canadian Immigration Live Q&A. So thank you, everyone, and wishing you all